Hi, I'm Cori, and for this Think for a Change video, I want to talk about philosophy as a box. And it sounds a little cliche, but it's all about thinking outside of the box. And why is that important? Well, because as soon as people start thinking about philosophical questions, it becomes pretty evident that, our answers aren't easy to come by. Philosophy's been around for thousands and thousands of years, and you think that we would have been figuring some things out by now if what we did were come up with answers. But philosophy isn't about coming up with answers, it's about asking questions. This we know from previous videos that I've done. And also just from experience if you start thinking about philosophy. But so then what happens is that there's a problem we can see when, I've encountered this with my students, we realize that there aren't really truths, hard truths, answers. We just want to figure out what we're supposed to do. Why can't it give us an answer? Well, because there aren't answers, right? But if there aren't answers, or there's no solid claim to truth that we can come by, that we can really hold on to and trust in, then we're going to encounter some problems, namely problems of how do you decide then between someone's claim and another person's claim. If there's no such thing as a solid, absolute, stable truth with a capital T, then how do we decide who's right and who's wrong? Okay, here's an example of this conflict that can happen based on just assumptions and why I think philosophy is really, really important for working through these conflicts. So here's one example is that I last few weeks ago, wrote a blog post and did a video on the marriage equality debates when the Supreme Court hearings started happening. I take it for granted as part of my assumption that homosexuality is okay. That what we're dealing with is a legal issue, not so much a religious institution, and not necessarily a moral issue, but rather a legal issue about granting civil liberties and rights to all U.S. citizens. Someone wrote on my blog, they left a comment that said that they fundamentally disagree with me. They fundamentally disagree because they say it is a moral issue. This isn't a legal issue at all, but rather homosexuals want to get accepted into society and have their sins justified as morally okay. So here you have the work of special interest groups that are lobbying, trying to push for legislation that will grant this kind of social acceptance. This person is fundamentally opposed to my truth claims. And we, if we were to sit and talk, would not get anywhere because we would disagree so fundamentally on the very basic assumptions that we take for granted as, how we build up our arguments. So how do we work through these kind of conflicts when I want to obviously say that that person is not so good in terms of their views and I like my views better? Here's how I deal with it. I take the truth question out, okay? And instead, I think about it in terms of a box. So here we have the status quo. This is the box that contains our reality and our experiences. This is the situation that we've got. Within this little picture of our box of reality, there is oppression, injustice, exploitation, and domination, whether we're talking about racial discrimination, homophobia, class inequality. There are injustices here that make up the reality of our experience. This is our situation, and that, I think, is undesirable. So, my fundamental assumption that I'm totally okay with accepting and owning is that I think we should try to get away from as much injustice, exploitation, oppression, and domination as possible. These things are undesirable realities and we should try to change them. That I take for granted. So, of course, this means that if I were to sit down and try to talk with someone who says, nope, I love oppression, I think oppression is fine and it's totally acceptable, we're not going to get anywhere. But if you can get on my side here and say, yeah, oppression, inequality, injustice, that's bad stuff. We should really try to get away from that. Then we have to come up with how to do it. And maybe we should do it without arguing for certain truths. Because when you argue with a truth claim, it's going to be really, really conflictual. And so this sounds weird, right? But you can think about it, that anybody who says, I've got the truth with a capital T, they're already basically walking into an argument that's going to be very difficult to convince anybody either way. So, I don't know, I won't get too loaded with all this. Oh, I'm talking about homosexuality, but I don't want to get political. Truth with a capital T. If someone's got the truth, I get worried. I get scared about that because that seems not so good. So anyway, back to the point. If the point is we've got this disagreement, how are we going to deal with it? I say get truth out of the question, and this is why. If your assumptions, what you say contributes to the status quo, when the status quo knowingly and we acknowledge has oppression, injustice, exploitation, and domination in it, then I think we should work on the assumptions, right? I don't want to hear an argument that just reinforces the status quo, because I don't like the status quo. I think our status quo sucks. So if your argumentative position, if your truth claims have assumptions in them, like homosexuality is immoral and wrong, then your assumptions reinforce an undesirable status quo. So I don't want to work from those assumptions. Philosophy enables us to think outside of the box by reworking our assumptions. What happens if we don't take the things for granted that we've taken for granted that led us to this unpleasant situation? What happens if we go back to the very fundamentals of our assumptions that we built up our reality and our thoughts on, and try to work those in a different way? How might that influence what we build on top of that instead? So philosophical thinking helps us think outside of the box in terms of changing our assumptions, being critical of our assumptions in the hope that it can come up with a different kind of reality. When we go outside of the box, though, it's really important to realize that this isn't about creating a new box. It's not saying, I want a picture where homosexuals rule the world, or something like that. It's not about saying, I want a picture where women rule the world, because sexism sucks. No, but we can say, we don't like the assumptions of homosexuality being an immoral sin that makes you less of a citizen. We don't like the assumption that women are inferior, and then how that works out in the world. So instead, let's go back and change our assumptions. The process then of thinking philosophically is a movement of stepping outside of the box. It's a practice of thinking creatively, openly, and newly with the hope that something different can emerge when we change our fundamental assumptions. It's not about prescribing a new picture, because that again is like claiming, I want the truth, I want this picture is the truth. No, that's scary. That leads to problems. So instead, it's a radical openness that goes back to more fundamental levels. Rather than building up to a new thing, we gotta keep breaking it all the way down till we get to the bedrock and see what happens when the fundamental things that we take for granted are questioned. So even the fundamental things like maybe science comes to truth and that never changes. Well, not exactly. But that's a problematic thing, because that means we've got to go straight down to the core of our beliefs and rework those assumptions that we hold so dear. And that can be scary, because then it's like, well, if I go all the way to the bottom of my core beliefs, what do I have left to hold on to? Now it's not even a matter of how can I fight between this person and this person's truth claims and decide who's got it right. Now it's like, if I don't have anything to hold on to, what am I going to believe? What's true? Well, okay, look back at other videos too. But this can be a really exciting thing and can be a really good thing as long as the movement itself is creative and open and hopeful that maybe it can create a new status quo. So anyway, there you go, there you have it. This is why I think philosophy is helpful for helping us think outside of the box in the hope of creating a new status quo that changes our assumptions that led to this crappy status quo. Maybe it can be better if we start to think for a change. So anyway, there's the video. Thanks for watching. I've got more coming up on the way. If you like this stuff, like the video, subscribe, and read my blog at CoriWong.com. Thanks a lot for following along, and I appreciate all your feedback, so keep it coming. Take care. See you later.